They say love makes you whole. They say when you find the right person, everything finally falls into place. But what if sometimes love does the opposite? What if, slowly and quietly, it begins to erase you? No one talks about the silent erosion that can happen inside relationships. Not the dramatic heartbreak, not betrayal, but the subtle vanishing. The way your opinions soften, the way your needs become negotiable, the way your world begins to orbit someone else's gravity. When did compromise turn into disappearance? When did caring become self-abandonment? There's a quiet epidemic hidden beneath romantic devotion. People who lose themselves not because they are weak, but because they love deeply. Because they fear disconnection. Because somewhere long ago, they learned that being chosen required shrinking. This is not a story about blame. It is a story about understanding. About the psychology behind disappearing inside love. Let's begin. It rarely happens all at once. No one wakes up one morning and decides to disappear. It begins gently, almost beautifully. You start adjusting small things. Your favorite restaurant becomes negotiable. Your weekend plans become flexible. Your opinions soften at the edges. You tell yourself it's compromise, that this is what mature love looks like. And at first, it feels good. There's a warmth in being easy, a comfort in being agreeable, a subtle reward in being the one who understands, who adapts, who keeps the peace. But something quiet begins to shift. You hesitate before speaking. You scan their face before finishing a sentence. You measure your reactions. You edit your needs. Not because they demanded it, not always, but because somewhere inside, harmony feels safer than honesty. And so, piece by piece, you reorganize yourself around them. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like devotion. You start asking yourself questions you never used to ask. Is this too much? Am I overreacting? Maybe it's not that important. And slowly, your inner voice becomes a whisper. The music you loved plays less often. The friendships you once prioritized feel distant. The hobbies that once made you glow gather dust in quiet corners of your life. You tell yourself this is temporary. That relationships require sacrifice. That love demands merging. But when did merging turn into dissolving? When did closeness become erasure? There's a strange comfort in orbiting someone else. It removes the burden of choosing, of standing alone, of risking rejection. When your identity attaches itself to another, you don't have to confront your own uncertainty. You borrow theirs, and for a while it feels safe. Until one day, you feel tired. Not tired of them, but tired in a deeper place. An exhaustion that feels like an empty well. A subtle resentment you cannot explain. A longing for something you can't name. And beneath it all, a quiet question begins to surface. Where did you go? No one loses themselves without first learning that disappearing is safer than being seen. Long before romantic love, there was another kind of attachment. Quieter, smaller, formative. As a child, love may not have been something steady. It may have felt conditional, dependent on mood, performance, silence. Perhaps approval arrived when you were easy, when you didn't argue, when you adapted quickly, when you sensed tension in the room and adjusted your emotions accordingly. Children are perceptive. They learn early what keeps connection intact. If expressing anger led to withdrawal, you learn to swallow it. If having needs felt inconvenient, you learn to minimize them. If love felt unpredictable, you learn to anticipate and overgive. Not consciously, but deeply. The nervous system remembers what the mind forgets. So when you enter a relationship years later, it does not feel new. It feels familiar. The scanning, the adjusting, the hyper-awareness of tone shifts and micro-expressions. It feels like home, even if that home once felt unstable. There is a quiet belief planted early. If I am enough for you, you won't leave. And so, being enough becomes a performance. You become attentive, empathic, flexible. You pride yourself on understanding others deeply, on sensing their needs before they speak them, on being the safe place. But who became your safe place? When you learn to survive through emotional attunement, you also learn to neglect yourself, because somewhere along the way, you internalized a rule. Connection must be earned. And earning requires adaptation. This is why losing yourself in love doesn't feel like danger at first. It feels like purpose. It feels like proving your worth. It feels like finally securing what once felt fragile. But underneath that devotion is an old fear. The fear of abandonment. The fear of not being chosen. The fear that if you stand fully as you are, with your needs, your boundaries, your complexity, the connection might fracture. So you shrink preemptively. You soften first. You disappear before anyone has the chance to leave. And the tragedy is not that you loved too much. It is that you learned love meant losing yourself. It feels emotional, but it is also biological. When you begin to lose yourself in a relationship, your brain does not interpret it as sacrifice. It interprets it as survival. Human attachment is wired into the nervous system. Connection regulates the body. A warm voice lowers cortisol. A reassuring text steadies the heart rate. Physical closeness releases oxytocin, the chemical often called the bonding hormone. To the brain, attachment is not romance. It is safety. And for someone who once experienced inconsistency in early relationships, closeness can activate something deeper than love. It can activate relief. The anxious mind becomes hyper-focused on preserving connection. Small shifts in tone feel amplified. A delayed reply feels threatening. Emotional distance feels like danger. The nervous system reacts before logic does. And when the body senses threat, it seeks regulation. How does it regulate? By restoring harmony. By apologizing first. By suppressing conflict. By over-explaining. By abandoning personal needs to avoid disconnection. This is not weakness. It is adaptation. Psychologists often describe this as anxious attachment, a pattern where closeness feels both essential and unstable. The individual merges to maintain proximity. Identity begins to blur because the brain prioritizes attachment over autonomy. There's also something known as trauma bonding, where intermittent validation strengthens emotional dependency. When affection feels unpredictable, it becomes more intoxicating. The inconsistency deepens the craving. Uncertainty intensifies attachment. And so, when you silence yourself to maintain closeness, your brain rewards you. The relief you feel after avoiding conflict reinforces the pattern. You associate self-suppression with safety. Over time, your identity becomes intertwined with another person's approval. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for self-reflection and boundaries, grows quieter when fear of abandonment activates the limbic system. Emotion overrides logic. This is why leaving, asserting, or separating can feel physically painful. The body reacts as if survival itself is threatened. You are not dramatic. You are dysregulated. And so, losing yourself is not a conscious choice. It is the nervous system trying to protect you. But protection, when prolonged, can become a prison. And eventually, the body begins to ask, at what cost? Inside you, there are two voices. One longs to speak. The other begs you to stay quiet. This is the quiet battlefield no one sees. You want to say, that hurt. But another part whispers, don't make this a problem. You want to ask for reassurance. But shame rises first. You want space. But guilt follows immediately after. And so the conflict is not with them. It is within you. There's a version of you that remembers what it feels like to be whole, expressive, opinionated, alive. And there is another version shaped by fear, careful, accommodating, vigilant. They are both trying to protect you, but in opposite ways. The authentic self says, I need. The protective self says, if you need too much, you'll be left. And the tug of war becomes exhausting. You begin overthinking simple conversations, replaying tones, searching for hidden meanings. You analyze your own reactions before allowing yourself to feel them. Am I being unreasonable? Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe this is normal. But deep down, something feels off. Not because your partner is cruel. Not necessarily. But because you're not present inside yourself anymore. You are performing stability instead of experiencing it. And over time, this performance creates distance, not from them, but from you. There's a loneliness that exists even in relationships. It is the loneliness of being unseen while standing right there. Because how can someone see you if you are hiding? The tragedy of self-abandonment is subtle. It doesn't scream. It doesn't explode like a volcano. It erodes quietly, like water wearing down stone. Each time you silence yourself to maintain peace, a small crack forms inside. Each time you override your intuition, sediment settles at the bottom of your emotional river. And eventually, you feel heavy, not because you love too deeply, but because you are carrying both people in the relationship, their needs and yours. The question that begins to rise is fragile, but powerful. What would happen if you stopped shrinking? Awareness does not arrive loudly. It arrives in small, uncomfortable moments. A sentence you swallow and suddenly feel tired of swallowing. A plan you agree to and feel strangely resentful about. A mirror you pass and barely recognize the person looking back. Realization is not dramatic. It is quiet grief. You begin to notice the exhaustion beneath your patience, the irritation beneath your kindness, the emptiness beneath your devotion. Not because love is gone, but because you are. There's a subtle ache, like standing in a room that once felt familiar, but now feels hollow. You laugh at the right times. You show up. You participate. But inside, something feels muted. You begin to miss yourself, your opinions, your spontaneity, your certainty. You remember who you were before you started filtering every thought. And with that memory comes a difficult truth. You did not disappear overnight. You participated in your own vanishing. This realization can feel heavy. Shame may rise. Regret may surface. How did I let this happen? But shame is not the point. Understanding is. You adapted the only way you knew how. You loved the way you were taught to love, by merging, by softening, by prioritizing harmony over authenticity. And for a long time it worked, until it didn't. Because the self cannot be exiled forever. Eventually, resentment leaks through politeness. Fatigue seeps into affection. Distance creeps into closeness. And then the most unsettling question surfaces. If I don't know who I am without them, who am I? This is the turning point. Not necessarily a breakup. Not necessarily confrontation. But a quiet awakening. The awareness that love should not require self-erasure. That devotion should not demand disappearance. That being chosen should not cost you your own voice. And in that awareness, fragile but undeniable, something begins to stir. Not rebellion, not anger, but remembrance. Reclaiming yourself does not begin with confrontation. It begins with noticing. Noticing the music you stopped playing, the opinions you stopped voicing, the boundaries you stopped honoring. It begins in small, almost invisible ways. You pause before automatically agreeing. You sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it. You allow silence to exist without filling it with reassurance. This is not rebellion. It is reorientation. For so long, your internal compass pointed outward, toward their moods, their needs, their approval. Now, gently, it begins to turn inward. And at first, it feels unfamiliar, even selfish. Because when you have built your identity around being accommodating, choosing yourself can trigger guilt. The nervous system may still react as if autonomy equals danger. But something else begins to happen. You feel clearer. You feel steadier. Not because the relationship has changed overnight, but because your presence inside yourself has returned. Reclaiming the self is not loud, like a volcano erupting. It is slow, like sediment settling in clear water. The river becomes less cloudy. Your thoughts become less tangled. You begin asking different questions. What do I want? What feels true for me? What happens if I don't shrink? And sometimes the answers surprise you. You may realize that your needs were never unreasonable, that your boundaries were never dramatic, that your voice was never too much. It was simply unpracticed. There's grief in this process. Grief for the years spent adapting. Grief for the parts of you that went quiet. Grief for the belief that love required sacrifice of self. But there's also something softer. Relief. The relief of feeling your own ground beneath your feet again. Love does not have to dissolve identity. It can hold two separate shapes, but that requires one quiet truth. You must exist first. There is a myth that love means becoming one. One mind, one rhythm, one identity. But fusion is not the same as intimacy. Two rivers can meet without losing their source. Two flames can glow without extinguishing each other. Love, at its healthiest, is not absorption. It is recognition. It is standing before another person fully formed, with history, with boundaries, with preferences, and choosing connection without surrendering identity. When you stop disappearing, something shifts. You begin to speak without rehearsing. You express discomfort without apologizing for its existence. You allow disagreement without interpreting it as rejection. And something surprising happens. If the connection is secure, it expands. If the connection was built on imbalance, it strains. But either way, clarity replaces confusion. Because when you remain present inside yourself, you no longer confuse anxiety with love. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. You no longer equate self-sacrifice with devotion. You begin to understand something simple, yet profound. Love that requires you to shrink is not love that sees you. And love that sees you does not ask you to disappear. There is courage in remaining visible. Courage in letting someone witness your full emotional landscape, the needs, the edges, the complexity. And there is peace in knowing that even if a relationship changes, you remain. You're no longer orbiting someone else's gravity. You're standing in your own. And from that place, connection becomes a choice. Not a survival strategy. Not a performance. But a meeting. Two whole people. Not two halves searching to be completed. Just two presences choosing to stay. If this video made you feel seen, if parts of this reflection felt uncomfortably familiar, if something quiet inside you was touched, you are not alone. Many people learn to love by shrinking first. Many people were taught, without words, that connection required self-abandonment. There is no shame in that, only understanding. This space exists for moments like this, a place where the hidden corners of the human heart are explored gently, without judgment, where silence is given language, where emotional patterns are not criticized but understood. If you'd like to stay connected to reflections like this, slow, psychological, and honest, you're welcome here. And if you feel comfortable, you can share your thoughts below. Not because you have to, but because sometimes your words might help someone else realize they are not disappearing alone. Take care of yourself. You deserve to exist in your own life.